Welcome to the ADU, DADU, that's Accessory Dwelling Unit or Detached Accessory Dwelling Unit 101 with second use, building materials, and mighty house construction. Doug and Laura Elfline are with me, and they're going to be doing most of the presenting today because they have a lot of knowledge on the subject. They've been doing a lot of these buildings and build outs for people in the area for years, even before the city started changing their laws on this. Doug and Laura have been in the construction industry forever. Doug says he's started probably from day one, came out ready to remodel, and Laura came along with the spousal package starting this mighty house construction. So that's great. So I'll let you guys take over, and then maybe towards the end we can talk about second use, or if a question pops up in the middle, I'm happy to answer any questions that pop up about how second use can help with this.
Fantastic. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
So like Amanda noted, we own Mighty House Construction. We started it 12 years ago when we had 2.5-year-old twin daughters. And Doug, like she said, has a million years of experience in remodeling and building. I think it's like 30 years in Seattle now or something. So understands our housing stock really well and our properties really well. And I have a more entrepreneurial background and marketing background. But at this point, after owning a construction business for 12 years, I know a lot about construction too. I don't swing the hammer, but I know the theory behind swinging the hammer. So that's a little bit about who we are. We do new construction, almost exclusively residential. We do new construction, and remodel is probably our bigger shtick. So yeah, so we wanted to talk about ADUs and the city in all the craziness of ADUs and DADUs and trying to figure out all this language. The city decided that ADU is accessory dwelling unit, and that we have and that an AADU is an attached accessory dwelling unit, and a DADU is the detached version. So now they have an ADU program with AADUs and DADUs under it. So it's a little bit of an alphabet soup there, but it's essentially the AADUs means that it's in the primary residence. It's an attic, it's a basement. It could even be an addition attached to the primary residence, but that it's attached. And then the DADU is detached. And it's more of the backyard cottage, the tiny house. They also refer, people refer to as a mother-in-law space, as they do for attached sections too. So you really got to do some sleuthing a little bit to figure out what it is that people are really talking about when they say they want more living space. So why do people want an ADU? It's for a whole slew of reasons. It could be rentable short and long-term dwellings. It could be just getting that extra bath in the house, an art studio, view gazing, aging in place. We hear a lot of people say to us that they'll have younger-ish kids and they have older-ish parents, and they want to build an AD or DADU, or sometimes an AADU for their aging parents, but then also can imagine that as housing pricing goes up in the city, that they either themselves will move into it as they get older and their kids will have the house to themselves to raise their family, or they'll stay in the house and the kids can be using the DADU during college, and just a way of saving money and getting to that point where they can get their own property in their own house. We've had people say we just need like an extra space to entertain, and then having the ability for someone to stay as a guest for short or long term is is something of value to them.
And of course, with the current climate we're in, the biggest thing we're getting right now is workspace in the house, and being able to have a quiet space away from the rest of the family who is there also, so they can actually get something done without, people walking around in the background half dressed.
Yeah, or crying at your leg, as my friend had happen the other day with her toddler during a work meeting. Yeah, for sure. And we often talk about with folks that are interested in offices, it's enough of a hassle to build a detached space, in particular a detached space, that making it into a DADU probably makes good sense. The distance of dollars and effort from just a studio space to a livable space isn't huge when you think about what can happen with that space down the road. And we often also say, that you never know what code is going to change, so get it permitted as such now, even if you don't put in the full bath and you don't put in the full kitchen, just get it permitted as such, and get it so that you don't have to work with new codes down the road to convert it later. So when people start thinking about an ADU, they start having all sorts of questions. Is my property big enough? How high can it go? Are you on septics or sewer system? How difficult is it to build, given the site parameters and access and all those things? How do I fund it? Most people's list is how much will it cost? That's a big thing. And so, that's all really good questions to be asking yourself. And what can you do on your property is another thing. In early assessments, the city has this new website called ADU Universe, and they do have a lot of good information to sort of start the assessment. I was poking around again on the site last night, just seeing if there was new features and so forth. And they do have this area where you can plot this property search area where you can plop in an address and it will say whether or not it's suitable for an ADU. So we plopped in our address, and our house is on a corner with an alley. And because of that, our property lot coverage lot coverage percentage is based on halfway through the alley and our official property. So that actually gave us a little bit more lot to work with. And so it was like all green lights, go for it. We happen to know that there was an addition onto our garage years ago before we bought the house that probably puts us over the lot coverage amount, but it's not in city records, as it turns out. So they're not using that as a calculator. They also aren't using the fact that we have like I don't know, what's the diameter of that tree? It's probably like almost 2 feet per tree that's over 100 feet tall in our backyard.
It's like 3 feet diameter, and it's about 80 feet to 100 feet tall.
Yeah.
So, and it covers a third of the property with its leaves.
Yeah, with its branches.
So
yeah, so there's no way they'd let us take that down to build something, and so it totally impacts our ability to build anything in our backyard. So the site is useful as like a question mark early assessment, but not super great for all the nuances your property might have involved. So, it's definitely a chicken and egg situation, right? Like, you want to do this thing, you are curious about costs, but we can't really tell you about costs. So you have a design and a plan in place, and you want to spend money on that before you know how much it's going to cost, and it becomes this sort of circular thing. So we definitely try to like make as many assessments as possible early in the process to help lead you, as do the architects that we work with. I should have said Mighty House is just a build firm. We have design capability, but not really bandwidth for that. So we engage a slew of architects and interior designers to help with that end of the process. So you have a concept that you want an ADU, and that's sort of the first step, right? And then from there, you need to decide what you want. Are you converting an existing space, whether it's inside your home or outside the home? This was a garage that was already on the property that we just converted into a DADU. It could have been an attached garage that we converted to an AADU, as simply, in this case, it was detached. Or, do you want to have a DADU in the backyard that occupies new square footage? This was a situation where the homeowners had wanted to expand on their attic space and just add a bedroom. But the old craftsman home, and in doing so, really meant restructuring so much of the house that it made it really expensive per square foot to do the work. We actually, so they took down their garage there in the left-hand corner and built this, not in its place because it was on the other side of the property, but as far as lot coverage goes, we built this. And the square foot price to do the attic work, which would have only given them a bedroom, was the same as the square foot price to do the whole backyard cottage. Clearly, it was a bigger price tag in the end, but the per square foot cost was the same. And they have like multitudes upon multitudes of better use of the space than just a pass-through bedroom situation. So making those decisions about what might work on your property or what you're thinking will work on your property leads you to the design and research and programming phase of the project. So this is when you start to be, so this property that I was just showing you ended up being where this number 2, this green area is. And you can see the house, and this is the lot size and shape of their property. So site placement is important. You need there's rules around how you access the space, where the entrance is in conjunction with neighboring properties. You have a question?
What are some of the rules around accessing the space? Do you know them off the top of your head?
Some of them are walkways, accessible walkways. So you can't just have somebody like have a little walkway that enters from the back of the property. If you do, then all of a sudden the easements move the building further into the property, because even the staircase going up to the property, if it's like stairs going up to it or anything, they need to, you have more space to walk through. So you just can't have it snake through the backyard in a little area for people to get to if you're saying renting it out.
Okay.
There's a lot of nuances in that, and that would be one of the architect can look at that. And every property is a little bit different depending upon if you're on an alley, if you don't have an alley. So there's a lot of little factors in there, but that would be one of looking at your property. And you can, I don't know if the website for the city gives you much of that or not.
This is the thing about the website, because I just was recently looking some stuff up for a friend who has an unusual circumstance, and it's confusing. It gives you the like general rules, but it doesn't give you all the nuances.
Right.
And that's where the value of having an architect who knows what they're doing can really research the details of the code. I even went into the code as well and thought that the code said that they can't do what they want to do. And it turns out, after talking to another architect who just permitted exactly what my friend wants to do, that you can do it. Mm-hmm. And so it was just how the code is written really sometimes gets complicated, and interpreting it with someone who deals with it on a daily basis is really useful. But like, for instance, this one, if they had had an alley off to the right on the side of the DADU, they wouldn't have been able to access it straight from that from the alley. They have to have the access over here
Or on the,
or on this side, but it couldn't have been on the alley side.
Okay.
So that was like one of the things that we looked at on another project. The other things that that get interesting around site placement is that this is a backyard, or it was going to be a backyard cottage. That was its intent. It turned into just a 2-story artist studio because this property here has 2 front streets. This 31st Avenue and the Forest Hill are considered front streets for this house and all the houses on their block there. And therefore they don't have a backyard. So they couldn't put a backyard cottage living space on their property. So that was an interesting nuance. So instead of making it into living space, they have, which they really intended it to be artist studios, but we're hoping it could also be a living space. So now they had to do just the studios. They couldn't put it in the kitchen and have it set up to live in. So
Hey, Laura.
again, yeah.
We have a question that's kind of right in line with this area that you're talking about as far as what counts towards your coverage quota. Do decks and porches or covered patios count as lot coverage?
So there's lot coverage and there's also permeable surface. And those are 2 different things to be looking at. Lot coverage typically includes your eaves out to the edge of your eaves. And then whether it's deck or not depends on how high the deck is. Patio doesn't count on lot coverage, but it does count on permeable surface.
I think is it over 4 feet? I believe that is, if you have a deck that's over 4 feet ground,
Yeah.
that is considered
Yeah, lot coverage.
lot coverage, not permeable, even though it's deck and water's draining through it. But if it's over a certain height, then it's lot coverage. If it's just like 2 feet off the ground or lower, then it's, kind of, it's just permeable surface.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, each category goes a little different. And even if you have, say, a balcony, that's sticking up, on your second floor or something, that goes to your lot coverage.
Mm-hmm. Right. I was just trying to think of a couple of examples. Oh, we had one property where they wanted to build an outdoor pergola, and they had the year before put in the sports court, and they had a choice at the time: permeable sports court or just a solid surface, non-permeable surface. And they chose the non-permeable surface, but that meant that they couldn't build the pergola that they wanted to build the way they wanted to build it, because then they had too much non-permeable space on their property. So, we also often encourage people that if they know they have multiple things that they want to do to their property over time, to really create a master plan that incorporates all of those things so that they can make sure not to screw themselves up later. So what's next? Oh, that's a weird black image that showed up on our slide that wasn't there before.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know where that came from, but so from concept of like, what am I doing to programming, where is it going in the house? Where is the access? What is going to be included in the thing? Behind the black square is actually a sectional view of really the 2 stories and the rooftop deck of one of the DADUs that we did with Living Shelter Architects. And showing, and I was going to illustrate with that image that they had on the bottom level, they had sort of a guest room workshop where they were going to put in a Murphy bed, but right now it's also used as a workshop for one of the homeowners' business, and then has a bathroom down there, a 3/4 bath, and then upstairs you have a kitchen and living space with a custom folding stair system that takes you up to a loft, and that loft has a window that's big enough to crawl through and go out to the green roof deck that has an amazing view of Mount Rainier and the water and Lake Washington. So, but for them, it was about getting the extra living space getting the business out of the house and capitalizing on that view that they could like see from an attic window that existed, but they couldn't really sit and enjoy it from this weird angle in the attic, you know, but they really wanted to capture that view for their home. So that was definitely a piece of the programming, and the architects worked really hard to figure out how to make the height restrictions match to still get the view and get all of those features incorporated into the structure. And for them, it meant digging down 6 feet. And that the height that is underground didn't count towards the total height of the structure. And so that worked out for them. It's not inexpensive to excavate though. So that's another factor of figuring it all out.
Hey, Laura and Doug, do you guys have any other tips on creating that master plan that you mentioned before you start doing anything to your property?
So if you kind of make a list and just write down things that you generally want for your property and things you're thinking in the future that you might like, just write it all down, and you can put, you know, number 1, number 2, which is your most important, all the way down on the list. You can start with that list. And then actually, once you engage an architect, they will go through that with you anyways, of the things that you want and what is most important to you. And then you can start to work from there of like, okay, this is what we want, so this is what we're going to do now. But I do want to anticipate doing these other things, and how is that going to, the things I'm going to do later, how's it going to affect the things that I've already done, say, to the house. So you can work step by step and doing each thing in its order, and doing things, being mindful of what you're doing down the road.
Yeah.
Because it might be that, yes, in 4 or 5 years, we want to do this to the house. So you have to anticipate a little bit of what you want to do. Granted, codes may change, and it might, all of a sudden you get new restrictions in there, and that's something you can't ever really plan on. But you can map things out and do things in anticipation of current situations, current codes, so that 5 years from now, that step, when you anticipate getting the money to do this project, you're ready to do it. And then you don't have to tear other things up that you've already done in order to do that project.
Right. And so sometimes that's about what's going on in the existing house, right? Like we were recently talking to a family about redoing their basement and main floor bathrooms. And they're thinking about someday having more of a primary bedroom suite in their attic, and know that in order to do that, they'll have to bring up the plumbing lines right through the bathrooms that they're planning on remodeling. And so it's okay, let's prep for that, you know, get a design for what you ultimately want up there, so we can get the drains up to that area in the proper places, and that we're not having to tear out anything we do on the main floor or the basement. Sometimes that's, I want a kitchen remodel, but we're thinking about putting, moving the stairs down the road so that we can have a AADU in the basement. It's like, okay, well then let's plan for where the stairs are going to go, and then plan how the kitchen remodel fits into that and how we can make things work now. Or it might be that we want to do a backyard cottage right now, but we're also thinking about adding on to the house. Well, let's make sure that you're not going to go over those lot coverages, so that you can maximize both of those features that you're looking at doing, or even an outdoor pergola, for instance. You know, just wanting to make sure that you can get all the things that you're wanting to get without impacting future plans. Speaking of plans, many of you may have heard that the city of Seattle has a list of pre-approved plans right now. They did an RFP out to architects, I want to say last January, a year ago, and architects, they had like 10 different categories, I believe, of different styles of buildings that could be a backyard cottage. And they selected like one for each category. We were involved in pricing and organizing around the accessible DADUs selected design with Magellan Architects. And basically the shell of it is that there's a design that has been engineered and drawn up in a certain shape and size, and that the city has taken it through approval process, except up to how it fits on your property. So that is still, they're not like you can just buy this plan and start building. You would still have to submit to the city a site map of how this plan is going onto your property, and any other considerations that might need to happen with that. But that said, the plans are super inexpensive. Oftentimes design can cost 10% of construction costs, anticipated construction costs. So these plans you're buying for $1,000 from the architect, you'll still have expense in getting that site map and the final permit taken care of, as well as potentially hiring a designer to help you with all the nuances. Like you might look at this one and go, I want exactly the finishes that were selected for this permit set, the way the siding looks, the way the lights are and the soffit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or you may be like, I want some horizontal siding. I don't want lights in my soffit. I don't want a bar, like you start to have all these changes. And as long as your changes are constrained to the interior or finish things, they don't need to be reapproved for the engineering. If you start messing with the shell at all, the exterior walls and the structure of it, then
window placement,
yeah,
door placement.
Right. Yeah, then you'll start to need to have it re-engineered and resubmit from the get-go. So they're restrictive, but they're also a lot of nice plans, and sometimes they work for your space. But like I said, you'll still need to hire an architect to get them. You can hire the architect that produced the plans from the get-go, or another one that can help you get it to that permit stage.
Another factor in that is being that we are in Seattle and there are a lot of hillsides, and you might be able to fit this on your property. These plans aren't including any unique foundation things that are necessary.
Right.
It's a basic foundation that will fit on most any property. But if all of a sudden you have a slight hillside, you'll need to have somebody come out to engineer the foundation for that, and a geotech to come out to make sure that whatever's done, it's not going to cause anything to slide away. So that's the one aspect that's not on any of the plans. There's a basic foundation plan, and that works for most properties, but being that we are in Seattle, there's a lot of hillsides and unique situations that that they'll have to factor in after purchasing the plans, and whatever architect you use to help you get through the submittal stage will factor that in.
Yeah. And truthfully, even before you purchase the plans, be having the conversation with an architect about how this will work on your property. It would be silly to shell out even the $1,000 on plans that you ultimately end up not being able to use, right? And that's what we also advise a lot. People will call us about kit homes, like this modern shed down in the left corner. It's a kit home. It comes with all the windows and the siding pre-cut and the roofing materials all pre-cut, and you assemble it, right? Some kit homes come even can be craned and placed in place and trucked in. And there's a variety of those solutions. You even see a Tough Shed out there advertising for offices and living spaces now. I don't recommend having a plastic shed as your living space, but sometimes you do what you have to do. But even those, depending on how big they are and how they're situated in your property, may or may not conform to code. Some of these kits are also produced in states with different building codes than we have. So you buy the kit, you buy the plans or whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you can't build it here because it's 2x4 construction or whatever kind of situation it has. They don't have the windows of a high enough energy value, or there's a whole slew of things that could go awry with it. So we definitely recommend, even if you're looking at a kit solution, to work with an architect about whether that fits for our codes and your property. So you've thought through all that. Oh, you have a question?
Oh, there's a few lined up. I just
Oh,
recalled one that kind of possibly has to do with permits. I'm going to throw it out now. This was from before when the participant signed up about getting the address, the additional address. Does that happen in permitting?
So getting an additional address would be, it can be done sort of two ways. One through the postal service, and where you just add like an A and a B unit to your property. Or if you're actually looking for an entirely different address, that can be complicated and would involve the architect helping to distinguish your property. Most of the times, the least complicated piece is just having an A or B suite or C suite. I forgot to mention too that, you know, in the city of Seattle, there was a couple of the rules that changed. One is that they got rid of the parking requirement that they used to have, which was awesome. And two is that they said you can actually have on a single family lot of certain sizes and above, you can have up to 3 dwelling units. You can have a primary, but only 2 structures. So you can have a primary residence with an AADU in it and a DADU on the property as well. So 3 different residents, same property, but only 2 structures. And that was and you don't have to, you as the owner of the property do not have to live in one of those units. And that was a huge change too. So that's good for a lot of people who are investing in properties and developing properties to have that.
We had a comment about, see what you guys think of this, that that having that lot coverage limits, does that encourage people to build higher?
Yes, they'll tend to go up because they're not then trying to go to their lot coverage, but there is a height restriction for each property also. And that's every neighborhood is a little different on what their height restriction is. And also it's where they base it off of on the property. Like if you have a slight hillside, they might base it off of wherever this, like almost the street level is that you're coming up. And other ones, it's like uniquely down, like a little bit down the slope. So you can actually go a little bit higher for your lot coverage. It changes a lot. And as far as the height of the building can go.
Right.
But most, it's about like 35 feet for most homes from the, basically the front of the house.
The median ground level, I believe it was called, right? Because again, we worked on this a little bit with that sunken patio where we dug down 6 feet. And the other piece is the backyard cottage roof cannot be higher than the primary residence roof. So they don't really want like units sticking up higher than the
existing structure.
Yeah. I'm just thinking that's not entirely an accurate statement. I think it's whatever the maximum height that your primary residence could be. So you might have a single story primary residence now and be building a 1.5 story or 2-story backyard cottage, but whatever your primary residence maximum height could be, you can't build higher than that for the backyard cottage. You have to be below that. So there are definitely nuances, and even still on that backyard cottage we did, it was pushing right up against the height limits, and we had to like adjust a beam because we were going to literally be like an inch or 2 higher, and it was like this whole thing for a minute there, you know, because it just how the property landed and how all the foundation landed. So and that happens, but it's workable.
Do you have any tips or a list of architects, or what do people look for when they're trying to choose an architect? Or their red flags?
Yeah, I have red flags. I don't know. I mean,
I don't know about red flags, but we have a list of architects that we have worked with, and not a lot. some architects definitely know the backyard cottage scene better than others. So it's talking to the architect and trying to get a feel for them of what they really understand. Ask them how many backyard cottages they've been involved with. If they've been involved with more, they just understand more the nuances of what you're going to need. And if you get any of the kit systems, any of the architects that came up with any of the drawings for these, they all understand the nuances of what you can do for this. And so if you like a certain kind of kit, I might just go to that architect that designed it so that you can, they can finish things out and they'll understand it.
You mean like the pre-approved?
The pre-approved, sorry,
Yeah,
yes.
not the kits.
Not the kits,
Yeah.
pre-approved, yes.
Yeah. So I think 3 red flags that came to mind after Doug started talking. There might be more that also come to mind. One is commercial architects. Sometimes people have friends and family or just someone who's moving from the commercial world to the residential world. And it's really, you'll need to have some more patience with them because it's a very different space and that they'll have to engage in. 2 is hiring friends and family to do your design. They may be fantastic designers, but unless you're paying them like their other clients pay them, you're going to get backburnered all the time. And it's going to frustrate you and frustrate your relationship with them. So don't do it unless you're going to pay them their normal rates. And 3 is out of town architects, people who don't live in Washington State or maybe even the Seattle area. Well, Washington State, outside of Washington State, because the codes change a lot around the country, and they'll design something that's fantastic and easily built wherever they live, and it's not going to fly here. And they just don't know the system of our permitting process as well. And that can be really frustrating both for you and them in getting through that. Many, not most, many contractors like ourselves don't assist with the permitting process because it is so nuanced, and most of the things that involve corrections and so forth need to involve the architect to make them. So we end up just being a middle person and not very useful in the process. So it's usually the architects that are doing that, or the interior designers. If you're doing an interior AADU in your basement or attic space, a lot of times if you're not adjusting the outside structure, you don't need to use an architect. You can use an interior designer that is really facile at those spaces. And yeah, like Doug was saying, we have a list of folks. You guys can definitely reach out to us on our website, mightyhouseconstruction.com. There's a contact form there you can fill out and say that you attended this and are interested in some referrals, and we can send you a few names. If it's helpful if you give us some more information about where you are and what kind of space you're looking to do, because then we can pick and choose some folks based on that information.
All right, I have one more that's similar to what we're talking about now, because you talked about hiring architects from out of state. How similar or applicable are the things we're talking about? We're talking a lot about what Seattle has done. How similar or applicable are these to other cities in King County? We have a participant who lives in Tukwila.
Yeah, it varies. It varies. I think unincorporated King County is fairly similar to Seattle, but every city has its own jurisdictions. I think just recently Bellevue got backyard cottages approved. I know Snohomish has approved backyard cottages for certain lot sizes because we've been getting a lot of calls for that area, which we don't serve. So,
yeah. But in Tukwila, we are actually doing a project right now, which is just a basement AADU, and their codes are a little more restrictive of especially size.
Yeah.
So what we can do in this space is really small. Now things are supposed to be changing there, is what we've been told, but the requirements of what this person can do in their house it's making a pretty small, like, studio type space. It's not getting a full 1-bedroom size that they're allowed to do
In Seattle.
in Tukwila.
Oh yeah.
So Tukwila is a little bit different. So you have to definitely go through each city of what they're allowing, size, placement, things like that. Everyone's a little different. And that's where you can start with going through what the city, you might be able to get a little information from them, but then maybe you might want to engage an architect that can crack through that system there and
their
codes, because everyone's a little different.
Yeah. Like I think in city of Seattle, you can have a 1,000-foot accessory dwelling unit in your home. In Tukwila, it was more like 700 or
No, it's less than that.
is it? It's
Yeah.
like 650 or something. It's just tiny. And her whole basement is near 1,000 square feet, but she can't build it to the full size now. Now they've said that the code is changing. So she's actually built a wall to create the ADU in the permitted space. And then as soon as the code changes, she's going to reapply and just cut open a section of the drywall that we've already framed in for a doorway so that she can then move her bedroom into the other space. So we're kind of finishing the other space as if she'll move into it, though technically it's a storage area until the code changes. That she'll only be able to access via a window. So
it's storage through a window.
Yeah. Until it changes. But yeah, so definitely consult with other jurisdictions. And let's see. So next stop is always like, how much is this going to cost us, right? And so what we really recommend is that once you have the concept and you've engaged in the design process, like when you're still sort of at that conceptual level before you've gotten your permit and before you've delved in thousands and thousands of dollars in nuancing the design, get it in front of us or another builder and have us do a rough estimate of what we think it's going to cost to build that. It's never a detailed estimate at this rough order magnitude stage, the ROM stage, or what we usually call ballpark. But it gives you an idea. You know, they'll look at your plans and they'll think about other projects we've done and that are similar and throw numbers down of what we think it might cost to do the project. And that at least starts to get you into the realm.
I mean, factors in the cost that are hard to understand until you really start like looking at your lot and where you're going to do things. One of the biggest is the plumbing. And can the plumbing drain line just connect to the existing drain line on the outside of the house somewhere? Oh, it turns out that the DADU is a lower height than what the drain line is going to be. So then you have to get a sewage ejection system to put that in and get that to move, which is another aspect of cost. And so all these unique things, getting power out there, anything like that, none of those, like if there's a cost that somebody's giving you, they can't give you full costs on that until it is mapped out and really kind of figured out exactly heights and where things are to get that in there. And that's one of the things, or what is it? We're dealing with a unique one right now. The city, we have a power line. We did a work on the house. The power line actually is crossing the neighbor's property to the house. Well, the city has decided that it no longer can do that. And so they have to pay to have the power line put on what they call a bridle. So it moves like halfway between the two posts and then it goes straight into their house. But that's a cost that the homeowner has to pay for because the city has decided at the end of the project that this is what is necessary.
Yeah.
And it's unique things like that that you can't anticipate. And we, on this one, we're like, really? Everything's done. Everything is done. And now you tell us we need to spend thousands more for this.
Well,
so it's
and there's definitely things like that, you know, and it wasn't thousands, it was like $1,000 or $1,500 more. So it's still, you know, it's not pocket change, but a lot. But when you are at that conceptual stage, we can come out to the property. We can see that there's certain things. We can talk to you about your sewer system. Maybe you've had a sewer scope and it's been identified that it needs to be replaced because it can't take the additional waste into the line. And you've done your research. You've been in the second phase, where you've done this design research and programming and understand that there are special nuances to your project. And so we can factor those into our thinking and be like, oh yeah, that sewer change, that's going to be 15 grand of its own, and like throw that number in there and start to get you closer to what it's going to cost to do your project on your property, because that does vary greatly.
We had a question about sewer lines and DADUs.
Always questions about sewer lines.
They understood that there's a fee from King County to get the sewer line connection to a DADU of 10 to 25. Is that true?
I've heard people say that, and we haven't seen that in the city of Seattle. So I'm not certain about that piece.
Yeah, I'm not sure on the fee on it, but there is
not that expensive a one, at least.
It's if besides the sewer line placement, and other things like that, they want to make sure that it can handle the extra material coming down it. And they also have to factor in your neighborhood, how big is the main line that's going down the street? And if they'll look at like, oh, you know what? Everybody on the street has applied for a DADU. The main line can't handle that extra volume. So we're going to have to replace the main line. And so the city looks at like, oh, well, we're not going to pay for it. You guys have to pay for it somehow. So it's things to look at like that. And hopefully for your sewer line, if you're doing it, you don't have to do the connection. If you're redoing it all the way into the paved concrete street, because if you have to cut into the concrete street, you have to replace the entire 10 by 10 individual panel, each one that you cut up to do, you have to replace that. And that is thousands of dollars for each one. Instead of doing a nice little cut or section, they require you the entire thing. And that does add a lot of cost in to just getting the sewer line alone.
Yeah. It sort of begs the question, what about like gray water systems and composting toilets? And you can do composting toilets and you can do gray water systems. It's complicated from a permit standpoint of all the things that they require, especially with the gray water systems. They want to ensure that where the water is going is to a spot that can handle that additional water, and have a backup for when, especially during the winters when we're getting all the rain, that additional water isn't oversaturating the area and can then hook into the sewer system. So you have all these redundancies that can get expensive, but depending on your situation, they may be less expensive than the other work that they're making you do for the sewer piece. So
can people do septic tanks in Seattle?
No,
they are trying
no,
to,
they can't.
Even if you have one, they're trying to get you off of it.
Yeah.
Because they're worried about the toxins that if you don't maintain your system properly and then something leaches out and then it goes to your neighbor's property of 3 different sides. And so they're trying to encourage people to move away from them. And there are homes in Seattle that still have septic systems. If they're working at getting them off of those, because they don't want those for multitudes of problems that can occur with them.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. So one of the things that happens when you do work on your home is that you have your home, it's 100 years old, it's fine, and then you touch a circuit and you have to bring that circuit up to code. You touch a water line or a sewer line or make a change, you have to bring the whole thing up to code. And so, yeah, so if you have one of the rare septic systems in Seattle, you won't be able to add a DADU to it for sure. Now, unincorporated King County probably has some different rules in different places. Snohomish County, where was it? Someone had, even Des Moines, one of our friends is building a backyard cottage there and has a primary residence, and they expanded on their septic system. So, there's definitely places around that are involved with that. But in the city of Seattle, if you have a septic, you're not going to be able to add to it for sure. I mean, our friend had to replace her. She's a designer, and her husband's a contractor too. So they had to replace their septic system to make it bigger to accommodate the DADU. But that was worth it to them rather than trying to figure out how to connect to the city sewage, which was not convenient. So
Yeah, because you don't want to have to replace a mile of pipe that the city the city has one contractor. That's the guy that does it.
Yeah.
They have an exclusive contract, and all of a sudden you just spent $80,000 on just your new sewer line.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So the costs, I think, are of course complicated, and like us contractors and architects are fond of saying, it depends. It depends a lot, and it's not that we're trying to be obtuse. It just really does depend. So there's intangible and tangible costs associated with the project. The intangible is really, how is it going to affect your life and your livelihood? Is it that you're right now having to go 5 hours to Spokane every weekend to go take care of an elderly parent, put the rest of your life on hold all weekends, or are you going to be able to move them there and then regain some of your life back? Is it going to add to your income by renting it out and making it a space that you can use down the road when you start wanting to travel and wanting a smaller space? So there's a lot of intangible ways of thinking about the space. And then there's the back end and the soft costs. And like I think we talked about before, the costs of design and getting to permitting can often be about 10% of what the anticipated construction costs are. So, construction costs have been going up though this last year. So that percentage comparable is probably lower now based off of that information. So, but you can expect like a, probably an architect fee of around 20,000 getting it through permitting and through construction, depending on the complexities of your project and how much back and forth you do with the architect and designer and getting to that final stage. We have one client that literally did like 14 designs with their architect before getting to their final permitted set. And so that was sort of outside of normal percentages.
Yeah. And there's also, depending upon when you talk to the architect, they'll find out from you how much you want them involved in the project from start to finish. And you might want them there the whole time. And so that goes into how much your overall they're structuring, the contract with them on that. So, or you might just say, no, just get me the design. From then on, I'll take it from there. If we need to call you or have any little nuances, then it's a little extra fees and you're just paying hourly for the extra things that need to be potentially done. But it's also a conversation with your contractor to not call the architect every single day, because you, the client, are getting billed for all that time the contractor is talking to the architect.
Right.
So it's letting your contractor know they're out. Any questions, come through me, and then I'll figure out what we need to talk about.
Right.
So that's a part of it.
Yeah. So I'd say, and also don't be afraid that you're going to contract with the architect for 20,000 and then find out your project is too expensive to build or whatever. Most all the architects, and this would be a red flag if they don't do it this way. Most all the architects should be giving you a research and programming cost of what they think that part of the contract would be, then they, getting some conceptual designs and taking you through to permitting stage, and then what the permitting stage would cost. And so you have these different points of the project where you can pull the plug and not spend the full cost of using a designer. And then you have the hard construction costs. Construction costs are what construction costs are. And I am sorry to report that prices have been skyrocketing this last year.
Lumber has gone up drastically.
Yeah,
unfortunately.
People hear a lot about the lumber, but it's also about material costs. Most manufacturers have slowed their manufacturing process by necessity, and therefore are making choices about what they're manufacturing. And because they're not manufacturing as much per minute as they were, the cost of each of those items is going up. And so everything is having a little bit more. Transportation takes longer, the warehousing process takes longer. So all of those pieces of buying the thing, whether it be lumber or a faucet, is going up for folks, for businesses. And it's just going to translate to the dollars that we all pay to do the thing. And that's not just construction related. I'm sure that that's affecting everything and that we do in our daily lives. So that's something I think, in thinking about costs, there's a lot of factors that go into it. You have the building materials, you have the finishes themselves. Are you tiling? Are you putting marmoleum in? We won't even talk about the stuff that's cheap and toxic for your home. So we're not going to bring those factors in, but how high are you going? A single level backyard cottage is less expensive than a 1.5 or 2 story, or one with a rooftop deck in addition cottage. What the site access is like. We had someone reach out to us who had a steep driveway, a few stairs up to like a deer trail on the side of their house, and no alley or backyard access other than that. And they wanted to do a backyard cottage there. So we would have to figure out how to get excavation done and concrete back there and all of those things. And it was just going to skyrocket for their prices. So site access has a lot of factors to it. What kind of landscaping do you need or want around it? What kind of aging in place factors are you incorporating, et cetera, et cetera.
And even in the landscaping, you're required at the end of the project, before you can get final sign off, you have to have your landscaping finished enough so it's not raw dirt or mounds of dirt that's just going to wash away. You have to have some sort of ground cover on the ground to, maintain the ground, because they'll look at the final guy comes around, the site inspector, just to make sure that it's not a mud pit for the neighbors to potentially erosion to wash away into your neighbor's property,
or storm drains.
Deal with that. So that's
yeah
unique little things that they will require before the final sign off.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to have all of your plants in place and mature plants or even fancy pavers. You can just throw down gravel and do it in inexpensive ways. But you have to have, like Doug said,
Throw down some sod.
Yeah, throw down some sod.
Just to cover it in the short term.
Yeah.
And then you can do the pretty finishing later, but
getting that final sign off. And so, with that, I'd say, what are DADUs costing? DADUs are costing over $300,000 for sure. They, as a custom built, singular design kind of system. If you're, and that includes, that's sort of the whole kit and caboodle, right? Like that's how we can kind of think about these prices, is definitely over 300, probably in the $300,000 to $400,000 price range. And it's factors by all these things and more. We even had someone who reached out to us 9 months ago, and they said they wanted a backyard cottage and they wanted to keep it pretty simple. And 9 months ago, I told them that, you know, it could probably be like $350,000 to do their project. It had great site access and so forth. Here's some designers, go talk to your designer. They came back with a design for 1,000 square foot, 2-story, 3-bedroom, 2-bath DADU. A space that my family could move into, right? So they were really building a whole new house, and the price went up, you know, and they had a covered deck off the second floor. They had a covered carport. They had, you know, a bunch of the features, and it went up to $500,000. But they're building a whole house, you know, it's not just a small cottage studio space with maybe a bedroom. It was a big deal space. So yeah, design matters. All these factors on the screen matter. Now that said, you know, you can do kit spaces like we were talking about, those modern sheds and the like, for less expensive. You can probably, outside of the kit part, you can probably do it for maybe $50,000 to $100,000 plus the kit. And then, and maybe finishes are sort of on top of that, probably, possibly. And then you have a lot of limitations because there's only so many kits that are going to fit our energy codes and our building codes, and that you like for your backyard. So that's something to factor in to it too. So you might be able to do a kit space for under 200,000, and you're going to have a lot of limitations. And so whether those limitations are enough for you is something to figure out in the design and the programming phase of the project.
So Doug and Laura, we have a lot of questions that are kind of piling up regarding all of these things and the AADUs.
Yes.
Does the city have any kind of little simple plans for AADUs? I think most people are putting them into the existing structure rather than building on. And so I don't know that would be very helpful for people, but what's the average cost for an AADU? And particularly if you're just finishing out an existing garage.
Right. I mean, it depends a lot, again, on all the things, but the nice thing about AADUs is that you don't have to get new electrical out. You don't having to get sewer and water out to the space. You're not having to build a new foundation unless you're doing an addition to create that AADU. But most people want to finish out a basement or an attic space, and then it's about factoring in some of the features. Those, I would say, they range more in the 200 to 250, again, sort of depending on all the things. To create a basement livable space, a lot of times people have to dig down or lift their house to get the right ceiling height in there, especially in our Seattle homes.
Yeah, a lot of basements are just really short, and they factor in even the beams that are hanging down into the height. And so you have to have the beams cannot be down below, I think the lowest you can have is like
7.5.
Yeah, like minimum of 80 inches because that's considered doorway.
Yeah.
So if it goes below that, then you have to factor in, oh, I need to get this beam put up into the joist space. What's in the joist space? So I have all this ductwork running through. Now you have to change all the ductwork, and it's also the ductwork hanging down. You can't have the ductwork hanging down below certain heights. So things in the basement you have to factor in like that, of like how easy can you, just walk through the space, your minimum height for that. So that is, potentially digging down. Is the concrete that you have, which a lot of Seattle homes have, it's what they call just a rat slab for concrete in the basement. And people have just started using it. It turns out it's only about an inch thick, maybe. And you might have to tear that up in order to put something on it that has a better structure to it. So you're ripping out all that concrete to pour new concrete in there. So some of those things can factor into it.
We're doing a AADU right now here in West Seattle, and one of the requirements in doing them is that the electrical panel has to be for the different spaces has to be accessible without crossing into the other space, right? So you could have a common room that you both have access to that is locked from the other private spaces, but that you both have access to, or you can separate them by doing a sub panel. And the one we're working on right now and separating them, it was like a $15,000 cost because of how the wiring was in that house. We were moving the sub panel maybe 30 feet, but just because of how the wires were run, it was a really expensive shift. You know, so there's those factors too. How do you finance it? There's a lot of different ways, obviously just having cash on hand that you've saved up. A lot of folks will get a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, and use that to do the project and then refinance their home after the project is done, because now their home has more value. And so you have more equity into the space. And so that's one a lot of people do. You can get a construction loan. Those are, they're trickier on our end, and they sometimes have more restrictions about getting work done. So sometimes we have people approach us about us just weathering in a space and then them doing the finished work themselves. And we do that for, we'll do that. Some contractors won't, but we will. However, construction loans sometimes have caveats that say that all the work must be done by a licensed contractor. And so you'll just want to pick the right solution for your situation. A number of people have been getting family loans too, like especially when it comes to moving your elderly parents into the space. Sometimes they're selling a home or have an investment property that they're going to be selling to move with you. And so they can use that money to help invest into your property and to the expense of doing this. Converting and other investments, of course, and a combination of all the things, right? I mean, you probably couldn't combine a construction loan and a HELOC, but you could combine most of these other factors too. Those are some things to think about. We've done a lot of work with homeowners who have used Home Street Bank and Umpqua Bank. Those guys are really great to work with, especially on the construction loan end of things. That can get messy from the contractor end. And so it's nice to know that you're working with your general will like to know that they're working with a good bank that's not less messy. So once you've figured out the design and where you're going to put it and how much it's going to cost, and there's definitely this period of where you're just going around and around on the detailed, refined dollars and finessing the design, you know. Sometimes we come up with a ballpark estimate that's higher than what people want to spend on their project. And so then we talk about what can change design-wise to help bring down costs and reprice that out and kind of do that dance a little bit back and forth. You can expect for most people who are doing a custom build, whether it be an attached accessory dwelling unit or detached, I would anticipate at least 6 months of design time. You get busy, the architect gets busy, we get busy, and all of those people need to be participatory in the process. And when one of them can't be, then it slows down everybody else's part. So oftentimes it takes at least 6 months to get to permitting stage. And then permit can take another 3 months. Maybe it's somewhere between 8 and 12 weeks in most cases. If you're using one of those pre-approved plans, that would obviously go faster. But we'll talk a little bit about that. So there's 3 different kinds of permitting. There's not needing a permit, which is means that you're not building a livable space, and that it's under 120 square feet if it's an exterior space, and it's not really attached. So you could build like a lean-to shed off your home that's not really built into your home, but is accessed from the outside. You don't have to get a permit for that. as long as it's under 120 square feet. But anytime you start to talk about a livable space, you're going to need some kind of permit. You want to talk about the other two kinds?
Yeah, the subject to field inspection is one of, it's small enough that, and it's not impacting the rest of the house enough. You won't be able to do that for a detached dwelling unit, but if it's a small space that you're adding onto the side of the house or redoing something within the house that you're not restructuring a lot of the main house, you can get that. And the architect pretty much just goes in, signs up that day, you have the permit, you're ready to go for your project. And then the inspector is who is coming out and making any changes, anything like that. So if something isn't done according to the plans, the inspector really has a lot of say of how that project, what needs to happen next on it. And then there's the full review process, which is the architect submits it. It goes in to a group of people in the design or in the permitting process, and they go through and look at every little detail of those plans the architect submitted, and they'll make revisions and changes to send back to the architect. And that process goes back and forth for a little bit. Sometimes it goes faster, sometimes it's a little bit slower, depending upon the architect's response and the city's response. But those are the main three versions. Yes, if you can get the subject to field, you're done, you're ready to go, you're ready to start tomorrow for that project.
It used to be that attached accessory dwelling units had to go through the full permit review. I've recently heard some architects say that they're changing that for livable spaces, that maybe they don't all have to go through. It just sort of depends on the size of the project and any of the structural changes with the project. It used to be that basically anything that was new livable, a second dwelling livable space, whether inside or outside, had to go through full permit. But I've heard that they're sort of changing some of those rules. And then you build it, you get the permit, everybody's happy, and then you get to build it. And you can build something like this. You can build something like this. You can build, and we don't really have pictures of basements. They're really hard to photograph. They don't have a lot of natural light, and they're usually shorter ceilings. But we've done several of those too. And then how you build it, from our perspective, is important. And Doug's going to talk about that some more.
Yeah, so it's choosing how, in the process of building, we like to tend to build preferably better than what code has really imagined. And so there's ways to easily improve on it and without really much cost. For like this project, to get the insulation that we wanted in the basement level, we use this product called Glavel, and that's an insulating and a drainage product all in one. And then you can pour the concrete on top of that. And so once it's all done, you have everything that you need for it. And then like for this project, the structure has the foundation, I'm blanking the name of the ICFs, which is just kind of a foam hollow block that they fill with concrete and rebar. So you get your structure and your insulation in one without then having to pour concrete, put a wall. So that's drastically reducing the volume of space within your project. So we tend to try to do things on the building end of it so that it's going to make it much nicer to be in and use a lot less energy once you're in it. And it's also healthier for a lot of the things that we're doing. We stay away from anything that, is going to off gas and have other issues that for your health down the road that you might not realize is being a health issue. Some of these products here are just different forms of insulation that you can use, like the sheep's wool insulation. Nice thing of that product is even if it gets a little wet, it doesn't mold and it doesn't destroy and break down. Most other insulations will do that. Your basic pink insulation gets this tiniest little bit wet and it's just dead and destroyed and has no R value left. So this is a nice, and it's a really healthy product, so that when you're in the space, you can be in this space and not feel like you're breathing in tiny little nasty dust pieces the whole time. And that's what a great benefit. We've had to do that on health projects where the homeowner is extremely sensitive to anything harsh. So we had to use wool insulation just because we couldn't add a factor in that was going to be detrimental to the person's health. Another way to do things is like that has this roof, which is, it's called Gutex, and it's a rigid insulation that goes on the outside. And by doing this process, we can create an unvented roof for it, which can create a warmer roof and use less volume of space potentially to get your R value for your roof line. And it creates for a better airtight overall space for your for living.
Yeah. The other thing is, I mean, sheep's wool is definitely a premium add-on to a project. It's probably about 15% more expensive than other cellulose or rock wool insulation. We don't really compare it against the pink fiberglass stuff because we refuse to use that. So we don't have that comparable, but it's, you know, it's really important to us that you're building healthy spaces. So we stick away from that stuff. But rock wool and blown in cellulose are another option for those.
So, and this is a building process that you can do, it's not required, but if you do this kind of a process, your quality of living inside your house is going to be a lot better. And also it's your energy value, that how this is built is going to be really low. And for that one DADU that we did that was built down into the ground a bit, we did a lot of this process on it. And we went there during the winter just for a dinner party, and we had to open up the doors because it was actually too warm in there. They didn't even turn the heat on because it retained the heat so well that it
just by the people energy in that space.
So the climate was much nicer. So they have said they've rarely even turned the heat on in the space because it stays so comfortable year round under any condition. Obviously, if you build something that's super airtight like this, you're going to add other systems, which is like an HRV and ERV and stuff like that in there so that it's regenerating fresh air. Because if you build it too airtight, you're going to lose all the good oxygen that you actually want in the house. So you need to replace that. And there are systems in there to help factor that in. And pretty much any new space, you're going to be required to do that too, because they're requiring you to build it more and more airtight, and they need fresh air to come into the space.
It's one of the new city energy codes that just went into effect this like February, I think it was, is that they are requiring for major home remodels, which is an undefined term, and new construction, that you need to do blower door tests at the end of the project. So I recommend doing it at the earlier stage as well in the project, that meets a certain air changes per hour. And the theory is, like, we've all probably lived in really drafty homes that naturally have a lot of air changes and are refreshing the air in your home, but it's an uncontrolled system. And so it also can cause lots of extra energy use, and that's unnecessary. And so what they've said over the last, I don't know, it's about 20 years or more, you know, is really about controlling the air changes that happen in a home. So build tight, ventilate right is really the goal for any new construction. And we do that whether it's just an addition for a kitchen or if we do it for a whole new home construction. And one of the things that meant to mention was that doing a wall system like this not only creates a better indoor air quality, and a lot of these products are lighter on the planet to produce, but it also increases the quality of the construction of the home, and it's not going to start rotting from the inside out. So that's an important factor. You put a lot of money into a space, you want to make sure that the actual structure is going to be healthy too.
Yeah, because for a while, I think it started in the 80s, they decided to create a vapor barrier on the inside of the house. So they lined the inside of the walls with plastic before they put the sheetrock up. Any home I've ever done remodeling on that has this has tons of black and white mold inside those walls because it has held the moisture inside the wall. And these kinds of systems that we're putting in now they're called like vapor smart. So the walls can breathe when necessary. So if it feels moisture in there, it releases it, whether it's into the building or through the outside of the building. And that's a huge benefit to the quality of the house. Because even though you might have this great wall system done of some other type, but it's holding moisture in the wall and in molding, that that stuff will slowly seep out, and you're just breathing the bad aspects of that in. So the health of you, it's also the health of the building, like Laura said. So the walls breathe, you can breathe, but it's not drafty in any way. It just knows when to get the bad things out of the wall. And then you could end up with a nice, easy space. The thing that's circled up there is a kind of a point HRV unit. So there's—
What is HRV?
Is it HRV or HRV?
It's a HRV, but it's a heat recovery ventilator.
Okay. Terminology always goes wrong with me.
But there's also the ERV that you'll hear, energy recovery ventilation or something. But anyhow, the HRVs are better in most cases because it's capturing heat as it's ventilating out. And then as it's coming in, that colder air is being heated up before it goes into your space. When you use just like a trickle vent or something along those lines, and you're putting cold air into your space, then you need to use more energy to combat that and heat more.
And then you create a cold spot wherever that is in the room.
Yeah. This is called Lunos. It works in pairs. There's also like Life Breath. You'll hear about that. That's a really popular HRV. It's a little bit more expensive depending on the size of the space because you have to run a lot of ducts from one central unit. These Lunos HRVs just go through the wall at point locations. They run, like I said, they run in pairs. One will be intaking and one will be exhausting, and then they switch. So placement of them is important, getting that right so that you're ventilating the overall space. Then the other thing that we have in this room that's hard to see is the infrared radiant heat. It's a fantastic heat source. It heats like the sun, so it creates, it's electric, and it creates heat from the unit and radiates down, heating all the objects in the room as well. That includes you, and so you feel warmer at lower temperatures, and the room stays warmer longer because everything is sort of soaked in that heat, kind of like it does out in the sun. Even on a cold day, you stand in the sun and you're warm because that heat is hitting you. And so it's really effective heat. There's some new energy codes that mean that you have to use ductless heat pumps in most cases, like that little guy on the ceiling or on the wall. But you can then offset with the infrared in other spaces. So depending on how your space is laid out, this can be a really great solution.
I would recommend, like, if you have a house and you're converting the basement to an additional dwelling unit, and you have ductwork that's blowing into that space into your house, I would make the recommendation of sealing off all the ductwork blowing into the basement, because it does travel sound through the ductwork. So you can one-stop sound between the two units. It also, you don't have control. There's one thermostat. There's one thermostat upstairs, so you're controlling the heat downstairs with this, and this person might not like the temperature that it's at. So it's nice to be able to do a separate heat system. So you might put a ductless heat pump head down in the basement or infrared panels. That way you can monitor, one, how much energy they're using for the unit, but then they can control it for what they're living, what's comfortable for that person down there is, and they're not being controlled by what you want your thermostat to be.
Right.
So it's good to help separate that. And then when they're separated, yes, you can figure out exactly how much energy they're using, so you can factor that in if it's a rental of what to bill out for that, if that's something that's separate or if it's something that's a part of the overall rent of the space.
Right. The two things that come up a lot when we talk about energy and electric use is, can I have a second meter on my home? And you can, but it's really expensive. And in 2021, we have tons of options for third-party solutions that you can add to your electrical panel and monitor your circuits. And because the circuits for your AADU or your DADU are going to be separated from the rest of your house, you'll be able to monitor just what those spaces are using with third-party apps rather than going to the expense of a second meter. The other thing that we get asked a lot about for basements is putting in radiant floor heat. Most basements before the 80s,
No, even most basements, even
before
to
the
this
90s,
day,
yeah, don't have insulation under the slab. And so if you add heat to the top of your concrete slab, that coldness underneath your slab is going to draw the heat down rather than having the heat go up. So you're going to heat the dirt under your house a lot better than you're going to heat the space in your house. So don't do that unless you know for sure that you have an insulated slab. Even still, doing hydronic or electric radiant heat for your floor is a more expensive install than doing a hybrid of a ductless heat pump and infrared or just a ductless heat pump. You're going to spend a lot more money at install. And when you have the radiant floors, the efficiency that comes from them is really about keeping it on at all times. If you let the system get cold, the heat up energy is really astronomical. So you're keeping your heat on for possibly more hours of the day than you actually are utilizing it. And so that's a thing to be considered. This is a wall cassette ductless heat pump, or sometimes referred to as mini splits. You can also get ceiling cassettes. You can get a cassette that goes underneath the window, attached to the floor. The ceiling cassette or the wall cassette are definitely better at getting the heat and the air conditioning out to the space
evenly across the room,
because it doesn't have to fight around furniture and other things in the space. And then you get to live in the space, or your friends get to live in the space, or you get to use the space, or however. You know, Amanda was talking about how to integrate second use into this conversation. Well, this project that we worked on is a great example of that. We built the structure, and then the homeowners worked at finding a bunch of second use items and doing a lot of the sort of nuanced finishes themselves. So they sourced all this barn wood and steel.
like carriage doors.
Right, these carriage doors. They sourced a spiral staircase here in the side corner. All of the steel was reused from other structures that had been taken apart. There's a spiral staircase.
And those are the hot commodity at second use. Once they get them in, they go quickly. So if you want one, be ready to buy it and let it sit for a long time at your house until you can get it in, because
we do not get them in often, and Doug's absolutely right. They go quickly.
Yeah. You know, so pretty much everything you see, other than maybe the toilet and the sink, the utility sink there, it was reused building materials in some way, and maybe the flooring too. I don't think the flooring was reused. That was new.
That was the one big thing that they got.
But this was the artist studio we were talking about that couldn't be a DADU because they didn't have the backyard. We just threw this picture in here. There was a hole cut in the second floor. And you could see just a line right there in front of the doors that they could take out the pieces of wood and then lower paintings through the hole because they did large format painting up there. So that was kind of a creative touch to the project.
It's hard to haul a big painting down a spiral staircase.
Yeah, very hard. And this is the garage that we converted to a backyard cottage. Again, this could have been attached as well. In this case, it was detached. When you're doing, whether you're doing an attached or a detached accessory unit, they're typically small spaces or smaller spaces. 1,000 square feet isn't necessarily small, but sometimes they get down to 700 square feet or 650. And you really need it. You end up maximizing every square inch of the space. Forget square feet, you're working in square inches. And so these homeowners worked with Northwest Wall Beds to create this very specific Murphy bed system here. The table folds up, the bed folds down. All the cabinetry and drawer systems were thought through. If someone was to have to live here full time, what kind of storage would they need? And what kind of systems would they need to live here comfortably? They created a tiny little kitchenette. In their case too, there wasn't really room for a range and still give storage space to the kitchen. So they just have an electric cooktop right here. It's a 2-burner. Again, it's a small space. You're not going to have a family of 8 living here, so you don't need to have a big range to cook on. The cooktop stove just took up barely any room in this top drawer, so they still had access for the utensils and stuff in the top drawer. And then created the microwave convection oven hood. So it does 3 things. You can actually bake in it or just use it as a microwave and use it as a hood. The most expensive part of this space was this refrigerator. It's one of those European, I don't remember if it was Lieber or
It was a Lieber.
One of those, but it's super expensive, but look at the space efficiency of it. And so that really
2 feet deep, 2 feet wide. So it
really
fit in the space.
Yeah, utilize the space really well. Not inexpensive though, and that's part of what goes into these bigger costs for these additional living units. You're working with small spaces that you're trying to maximize, and sometimes you do things that are more expensive than you might do when you have more square feet to work with. Their bathroom, which is a little hard to tell in this photo, there's some more on our website, but it's tiled walls and ceiling to make it into a wet room. And so in doing that, you don't have to have some of the same clearances around the sink and the toilet that you do by other code, because there isn't glass around the shower. It's just considered a wet room. In their case, they put a shower ring over where the quote unquote shower area was to help mitigate getting water everywhere in the space. But it's expensive to tile all the walls and the ceiling in even a small space. But it meant they maximize the living space by making that bathroom as small as they could. Let's see.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, here's pictures. I forgot I had this in here. So they really have a lot of tile work. And then this space was really multifunctional, workspace downstairs, living space upstairs. They have this great deck that attaches them, and then a staircase down to the sunken patio and the rooftop deck to capture those views. That technically can be planted as a green roof. And then again, little tiny bathrooms, tiny little I think it was 2.5 foot square shower, but putting all that glass around it really helps make it feel bigger than it is. Makes the bathroom feel bigger than it is. It's not inexpensive to do all that glass though. So those are some of the trade-offs that you have to plan through in maximizing your space. Those doors also help to give you that indoor-outdoor living feel without having the expense of a nano wall system. They're a nice solution. And then living space. Tiny little kitchenette. They, did do a range in this situation, but they don't have as much cabinetry and storage as that other kitchen had. So there's some trade-offs there. I think just a quick takeaway message before we get into questions and answers is to, keep it as simple as possible, but building's expensive, so try to maximize what you can get for your dollars. Push the envelope as far as making sure that the aesthetics match the rest of your property and that it's going to be seen of value to folks down the road that are working to buy your home or invest. Also with just efficiencies and being kind to the planet. Find those small sticky things that you can do that really make a difference in how you or others are going to utilize the space and play and grow and work and whatever you're going to use the space for. So let's open it up to some more questions now that we've gotten through the content.
There was still kind of a lot of questions about finishing an existing garage. It seems like maybe, Anne, you possibly have a separate, like a detached garage. So if you were going to turn that into a unit, it would be a DADU. And
Right.
then if your garage is attached, then it would be an AADU. So, and then also a question about shipping containers. Do you guys have any experience or heard any stories about turning shipping containers into DADUs?
There are shipping containers that have been converted into that, and we also know like little businesses for people to do on their property. On those, your biggest requirements are you need a foundation to support it. You need to be able to obviously get a rather large truck in to drop it off and maneuver it onto the space, or crane for trying to fit that onto your property. But you definitely still need to come up with the insulation and the other aspects about it to make it watertight and warm enough in there. So you just can't leave it as metal walls, even though you might like the look for inside and outside of those metal walls. You're going to have to add insulation either on the inside of the building or the outside of the building, and to get to what you need for code, which then obviously is taking away a little bit of maybe the look that you wanted in the space. Or if you add it to the inside, you're reducing the space.
Right.
So you do work for a quick structure to go into place, but you still have to do kind of all the other little aspects about it.
If you're looking for like Doug said, a quick structure for workspace or a workshop that's under 120 square feet, so it's falling outside of all the code stuff, that's cool. But beyond that, it starts to get challenging as far as, like Doug mentioned, keeping it aesthetically why you've probably wanted to start with the shipping container and then meeting all the energy codes. It gets a little tricky.
If it's just an office space that you like, hey, I need a quick office, plop it in there, and yes,
storage is great.
Or storage, you can do that.
Yep.
Excellent. Would you guys say Mighty House is based out of West Seattle, or are you based out of Soto?
Well, we used to have, this is the answer. We have an office in Soto that we're currently paying a lease on, but nobody's been there for a year. So we're all working out of our home offices now. So we're throughout the city of Seattle, pretty much. Our home is in West Seattle, and we have a few staff that live in West Seattle, but we do work throughout the city. Excellent. Mostly, and then sort of out cities just on the edge of Seattle too. So
I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about using salvage in your planning for your units. It can be really nice and easy because it doesn't have to match anything else in your home. It doesn't have to be necessarily your favorite style or the style of your house, because it's different. It's its own space. So you can start with what's available as reuse, and it doesn't have to match anything else in your house. However, I would say it's best if you can start planning what you can get from reuse in your planning process, and possibly have a place to store it and collect it as you go.
Yeah.
Particularly if you want to use windows and doors and things like that, you want to know what those things are before you permit, it sounds like. So you would want to have those and make sure they're yours before you.
And the hard part is they might require, the city's going to require certain U value from the windows. And so getting certain windows that might not meet the U value of what you need at second use gets a little tricky. Now, granted, I have never seen an inspector on site specifically go through and look at every window's U value on any project. So if it turns out like a bunch of windows in there you got from second use, the inspector's probably not going to care unless you got a bunch of single pane windows from second use. They're going to be like, why do you have single pane windows in here? That one they would probably note as a red flag.
Or aluminum windows, because aluminum windows are notoriously not up to building code U value unless you get really expensive, like passive house quality aluminum windows. So that's usually a red flag for them when they see those. So, you know,
Unless they're brand new.
tread carefully on that. But yeah,
But
definitely planning ahead. The Tukwila project that we're talking about right now is going to be like a flagship project for second use, because she's been planning for this project for about 2 years and happened to have a garage that was underutilized. So she has her cabinets and she has her lights and she has her doors and she has some trim work and she has tile and she has slab material and she had for her counters. And she has her faucets and her sinks, all from second use.
All stored throughout the house and garage, waiting for this to be done.
Yeah, it's going to be great to get that project photographed and case study done. But yeah, it's, you know, she was repurposing a space. So not building new materials really, except for a little bit of framing materials and insulation. There's lots you can do. It does take a lot of pre-planning, you know, have your design, and then you need to, you know, with using salvage, you have 2 ways you can go. You can plan your design around what you've found, or you plan your design and then have to go find what fits your design. And then, you know, you go back and forth depending on the space. In her case, she was able to find all the cabinets she needed for the kitchen area, except for a tall pantry type cabinet. And so we'll build that one cabinet, but still she saved thousands and thousands of dollars on her kitchen cabinets. So building one custom cabinet is not a big deal.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I want to thank you guys very much for this presentation. It was very thorough, and I think it got a lot of people at least knowing the questions to ask.
Yeah,
A few basics and some starting points, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, go to our website, mightyhouseconstruction.com. Like I said, if you have interest in getting some recommended designers or architects, we'd be happy to shoot you the folks that we love. If you have additional questions, feel free to send a note there as well. Depending on how complicated it is, we might just schedule a time to talk over the phone or over Zoom rather than do the back and forth email thing. But I'm happy to continue the conversation.